Welcome to Haxby Shed. I'm going to do some work with my shaper set up as a grinder. I've got two jobs to do. The first one is to do some grinding on this parting tool holder, and the second is to do some grinding on the jaws of this welding rotator chuck. I'll bring you in to show you what I'm going to be doing. Neither of these jobs needs to be super accurate, just good enough. I bought this parting tool holder from eBay, and it's pretty good really, but there's two problems with it. The first is that somebody has ground it away to fit a 20mm tool holder, which is good for me, but the problem here is that they haven't quite ground enough off, and it's not ground perfectly. It's pretty good, but it's not quite right, and it sticks in the holder, and I can't get it out now. There we go. The second problem with it is it's bowed. So it's bowed this way, in the middle here, coming towards this side. So if I can grind this okay, I'll lay it flat and I'll grind the hump out of the middle of there. I've tried it on the press. It's very hardened, and every time I try to bend it, it springs back, and it might crack it if I try to press it too much. So that's the first job. Now if that goes okay, the second job here is on this chuck on the welding positioner. I can't tell you why it's like this, but these jaws are terribly ground, and they're very tapered towards the front, kind of opened towards the front. And if I just clamp this piece of bar here, just look. I've no idea how they ended up ground like that. But what I'm hoping is I can take these jaws out and just put them in the vise and on the shaper and grind these jaws here, just there. Now, I'll say it again, this is only for a welding positioner. It doesn't have to be super accurate. I think it'll be good enough, certainly a lot better than this. But I will, after I've ground them, I will take this chuck off and put it on the lathe, and then I'll clock it and just see how close we get it, just as a, out of interest, that's all. I made this bracket some months ago to take my angle grinder, and this screw here just holds it on, single screw, and I've got a support here. The wheel spins this way, so all the sparks fly out to the front, which is what I want. The wheel here is just a fairly broad steel cutting carbide wheel. I do have a diamond wheel for this, but I'm not planning to use it this time. I know I'd be better with CBN, but I haven't got any, and it's a bit expensive. I think this will be fine. Well, that's the first pass done, and I think that looks okay. It's ground here, and it's missed here, but that's what you'd expect because this was only hand ground before. Three passes and it's done. Oop, happy with that, that's good. I think that's about right for stroke and speed, so I'll start the grinder and touch off. So here we are, after just one light pass. It's bright between here and here. And even that makes quite a difference to the way in which the blade sits. I need to think about how much more to take off really. I'd be aiming to get 80% benefit for 20% effort. I gave that 3 or 4 passes, and I think that'll be good enough. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. So now we'll move on to grinding those jaws. If you look at those 3 jaws and the gripping surface here, and how narrow that is there and how wide it is there, I can't understand for a moment how they've ended up like this. I think it'll just be a forever mystery. Anyway, I'll transfer them to the vise on the shaper, and we'll try and grind these to be equal across this length. Well, there's a lot of assumptions built into holding the jaws like this, but they're so bad, anything I can do has got to be an improvement. And I'll just remind everybody again, it only has to be good enough for the welding positioner. It's not ever going to be a precision chuck. But what I will do is when these are ground, I'll put them in the chuck, we'll mount that in the lathe, and we'll just see how far out it is. Well, they're ground. At 2 thou each time it was a lot of cuts, and I have a strange ringing in my ears. But are they good enough? I don't know, do I? Let's get them out. We'll put them in the chuck. They're not bad to look at. Well, there's two questions really. The first is, does it hold this bar now? And the answer is yes, it does. So that much is fixed. The second question is it in the middle? Now, if it was out by 0.5 millimetre, it wouldn't matter for this welding positioner, but I am interested to know. So we'll put this chuck on the lathe and we'll just clock this bar and see where it's ended up. Now I'm going to make an assumption that this outer here of the chuck would be concentric with this centre, which in itself is quite a big assumption. That's what we'll work on. Right, well I've got it reasonably centred. This is flicking about by about 5/100ths of a millimetre, so about 2 thou. Well, you can see the run out on the bar is about 0.2 of a millimetre there, or 8 thou, which is good enough for my welding rotator, but I'll admit to you that there is still a bit of taper on those jaws. Fast forward 24 hours, I think I can do a better job than this. I'm going to set these jaws up in the Shaper-grinder again, but in a different vise, which I think is more accurate. It's worth a try. Right, now the jaws are in the big vise, made in India. I'll zoom in and I want to show you something. Can you just see on those jaws? There's a little mark there, there and there, which means that the jaws have been gripping here, which is what I thought. So I'm hoping that when I start to grind, it should be cutting here, but not here at first. I don't know, we'll see. Well, in fact, it's about the same, 0.2 of a mil. And when I look between this bar and the front of these jaws, I do see a very, very slight gap. So that tells me that these jaws, when you tighten them, they must rock forward slightly. And it reinforces the fact that when you're grinding the jaws in the lathe with a tool-post grinder, you've got to clamp the jaws closed onto some kind of spacer first. Otherwise, they won't be right when they're clamped, if you get my point. Anyway, I'm still going to say that's successful for what I'm trying to do with the welding positioner. And I think it proves the Shaper-grinder. And actually, it proves both of my vices, the small one and the large one. So I hope that was useful to somebody. Thanks for watching Hacks My Shed.